Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. I am so thrilled to have you here today because we are opening up a truly massive, historically monumental case file. Today, we're taking a deep dive into the strategy, the execution, and honestly, the deeply controversial aftermath of the attack on Pearl Harbor. We're going to look way past the standard historical narratives you might already know and dissect exactly how this event unfolded, from the grand naval strategy right down to the bureaucratic red tape.
So, it's a question that has literally haunted historians and military strategists for decades. Was the devastation of Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, the result of a brilliantly conceived and executed tactical strike by Japan, or was it, at its core, a catastrophic systemic failure of American intelligence and communication? The answer is incredibly complex, and it's a perfect example of why unpacking this history matters so much for understanding modern military accountability.
Here's our roadmap for this case file today. First, the road to war. Second, Yamamoto's carrier strategy. Third, the day of infamy. Fourth, the intelligence gap. And finally, the 1995 Dorn Report.
Section 1. The Road to War, a breakdown in diplomacy.
Okay, it's really crucial to understand that this attack didn't just happen in a vacuum. It was the boiling point of a ticking clock. Starting back in 1937, Japan and China got locked into a full-scale war. The United States strongly opposed Japanese incursions and started using economic leverage to push back. By 1940, the U.S. halted militarily useful exports, and Japan responded by allying with Germany and Italy in the Tripartite Pact. But 1941? That was the real breaking point. The U.S. enforced a total oil embargo and completely froze Japanese assets. The final wedge was the Hull Note in late November, basically a final U.S. diplomatic proposal demanding Japan withdraw from China and Indochina. Cornered by that severe oil embargo, Japanese leaders viewed the Hull Note as an absolutely unacceptable ultimatum. They decided right then that they had to act swiftly and decisively to secure resources in Southeast Asia.
Section 2. Yamamoto's carrier strategy, an offensive shift.
Right, so to secure those southern resources, Japan had to make sure the U.S. Pacific Fleet couldn't interfere. Enter Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, commander of the combined fleet. He basically took Japan's traditional naval doctrine and flipped it completely upside down. Just listen to what he wrote in a memo in early January 1941, a full 11 months before the attack. He argued that Japan must launch a fierce attack on the enemy's main fleet and destroy it at the opening of the war, making the U.S. Navy and the Americans lose their morale to the extent that they cannot recover. See, traditionally, the Japanese Navy planned for a defensive war, waiting to ambush the U.S. fleet as it sailed across the Pacific. Yamamoto threw that out. He proposed a highly aggressive first strike offensive using massive air power.
Pulling this off required three monumental tactical shifts. First, Yamamoto prioritized aircraft carriers. This was a super bold move in an era where battleships were still considered the undisputed kings of the sea. Second, to maintain the element of total surprise, his strike force took a grueling, storm-tossed 4,000-mile northern route, completely avoiding commercial shipping lanes. But the third point, it's a true engineering marvel. Pearl Harbor is remarkably shallow, only about 12 meters deep. Standard aerial torpedoes would literally just dive straight into the mud. So the Japanese engineered modified torpedoes, fitting them with special fin-shaped equipment so they'd run shallow. It was a brilliant, flawlessly executed technical solution to a seemingly impossible geographical problem.
Section 3. The Day of Infamy. The Execution.
On the morning of December 7, 1941, Yamamoto's tactical vision became a devastating reality. I want us to just pause on this stark number for a moment. 2008. That is the number of U.S. Navy personnel killed in action during the assault. It was a massive, sudden loss of life that instantly galvanized a previously isolationist American public, violently pulling the United States straight into the Second World War.
The material damage to Battleship Row was absolutely catastrophic. 5 ships were sunk, though amazingly they were later raised and repaired, and 12 more were heavily damaged. The USS Arizona was completely lost after a massive 2,000-pound bomb penetrated her forward magazines, and the Oklahoma and Utah were completely destroyed. The Japanese definitely achieved their goal of crippling the battleships. But there is a crucial irony here. 0 U.S. aircraft carriers were present at Pearl Harbor that day. The very vessels Yamamoto's planners knew would dominate the future of naval warfare were completely absent, And that twist of fate would prove disastrous for Japan at the Battle of Midway just a few months later. Section 4. The Intelligence Gap. Washington versus Hawaii. So you have to wonder, how did the Pacific Fleet get caught so completely off guard? The aftermath sparked massive investigations, and the core issue boils down to a massive, tragic disconnect. Back in Washington, military and civilian leaders were privy to top-secret magic intercepts, meaning they had actually broken the Japanese diplomatic code. They saw the bomb plot message instructing Japanese agents to grid out ships at Pearl Harbor. They even intercepted the 14-part message terminating negotiations right before the attack hit. Meanwhile, over in Hawaii, Admiral Kimmel and General Short received what were essentially just generic war warnings. They were told war was imminent, likely in Southeast Asia, but they received absolutely zero tactical warning that Hawaii itself was a target.
This creates a picture of wildly uneven intelligence, extracted directly from official Department of Defense records. Take the bomb plot message on October 9th. Washington had it, Kimmel and Short definitely did not. What about the winds message indicating a break in relations? Washington had it, Kimmel got a version of it, but Short was left entirely in the dark. The flow of critical intelligence was vastly asymmetric, and honestly, bureaucratic rivalries between the Army and Navy just made the information sharing so much worse.
However, it's important to note the commanders in Hawaii were not totally without fault. Because they lacked their own robust intelligence, they relied almost exclusively on Washington for a tactical warning, which was an act of misplaced faith. And with the resources they actually did have, they made some pretty critical misjudgments. General Short, fearing local sabotage more than an aerial assault, had his army planes bunched together and kept the anti-aircraft ammunition locked away from the batteries. Admiral Kimmel didn't really have the planes for a 360-degree sustained aerial reconnaissance, but he also kept the warships clustered tight in port. They were blind to the approaching threat, yes, but their defensive posture tragically maximized the damage when the strike finally came.
Section 5. The 1995 Dorn Report. Investigating Accountability. Fast forward a bit. For over 50 years, the families of Admiral Kimmel and General Short fought tirelessly to clear their names, arguing that they were basically unfairly scapegoated by Washington officials who were just trying to cover up their own intelligence failures. Finally, in 1995, the Pentagon conducted an exhaustive review. What we have in the case file is the actual Undersecretary of Defense memorandum from December 15, 1995, drafted by Edwin Dorn. This document, widely known as the Dorn Report, reviewed thousands of pages of previous congressional and military investigations. Its whole goal was to impartially settle a highly emotional debate. Were Kimmel and Short excessively punished, and should they be posthumously advanced in rank? The crucial finding of the report is pretty unequivocal. Dorn concluded, responsibility for the Pearl Harbor disaster should not fall solely on the shoulders of Admiral Kimmel and General Short. It should be broadly shared. The report officially acknowledged what those families had been saying for decades. Washington failed spectacularly in communicating the real urgency of the situation to Hawaii.
Summarizing things, the Dorn Report ultimately found that Washington failed to convey the urgency of those magic intercepts. But concurrently, Hawaii failed to properly alert and coordinate the defense facilities they did control. The final conclusion was that commanders on both sides committed serious errors of judgment. However, these errors were exactly that. Errors made in the fog of an impending war. They didn't amount to criminal dereliction of duty, like earlier, more heated wartime reports had claimed. Ultimately, because they were the commanders on the ground and therefore accountable for their units, the report recommended no official posthumous advancement in rank for Kimmel or Short. Which leaves us with this final, really provocative question. In the fog of impending war, surrounded by massive bureaucracies, broken communications, and dealing with a fiercely innovative enemy, can responsibility for a catastrophic surprise attack ever truly rest on just one set of shoulders? The Pearl Harbor case file shows us that history is rarely as simple as finding a single scapegoat. It's a sobering reminder of the complex reality of leadership, communication, and historical accountability. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. I really hope this structured look helped you grasp the incredibly intricate layers of this pivotal moment in history. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.